Nervous?
Yes. I don't like this.
You only have 75 more to go.
Number 10. Top Gun. This movie is like a greatest hits of 80s movie tropes, and we love every second of it.
I feel the need for speed. Ow!
You've got young Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer strutting around as tough military guys trying to make their mark. And best of all, there's the music. New wave band Berlin won an Oscar for Take My Breath Away, and nothing screams 80s excess quite like Danger Zone. Kenny Loggins is an icon of 80s movie soundtracks, and he is in top form here. Top Gun was a huge commercial success, and it's easy to see why. All the ingredients are here.
Where do you think you want to go? I thought of being an instructor, sir. Top Gun? Yes, sir. God help us.
Number 9. A Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven's masterpiece is timeless and still very effective.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
Think about it. The concept of being killed in your dreams will never not be scary because we'll always have to sleep. That being said, the movie also oozes the 1980s, primarily in its style and sets. It starts with the outdated technology like Glenn's headphones, his little bed TV with the massive antenna, and the computers that monitor Nancy's sleep.
Okay. She's asleep now.
Thank God.
There's also the glorious 80s hair on display throughout, with many characters sporting that distinctive 80s poof. And talk about 80s fashion. If you want a visual representation of this era, look no further, but let's not bring Freddy's fashion back, okay?
What's the coroner got to say? He's in the jaw and puking since he saw it.
Number 8. Ghostbusters. Few movies can instantly transport 80s kids back to their childhoods quite like Ghostbusters.
Ray, when someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes!
This was the cultural phenomenon of the time, complete with iconic merchandise like the Proton Pack. But Ghostbusters is also just a very 80s movie in general. It's got that gritty New York backdrop, the kind of casual on-screen smoking you rarely see nowadays, and it rides the line between comedy and horror in a way that any 80s baby will remember from their favorite childhood films. And of course, Ray Parker Jr.'s chart-topping song serves as maybe the most perfect theme song ever composed for a movie. Hot take? Fine. But Ghostbusters provides the 1980s in 105 glorious minutes.
Something strange in the neighborhood. Who you gonna call?
Ghostbusters!
Number 7. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Yes, there are some elements of Ferris Bueller's Day Off that look 80s. There's the Ferrari, Ferris's leopard print vest, and various pieces of technology that look hilariously out of date today.
This is my 9th sick day this semester. It's getting pretty tough coming up with new illnesses. If I go for 10, I'm probably gonna have to barf up a lung. So I better make this one count.
But it's not the visual look of the movie that screams 80s. It's more the general style. It's very John Hughes, depicting a small group of teenagers having a good time in the city without the interruptions of cell phones, the internet, or any other technological innovation.
What do you mean nothing good? We've seen everything good. We've seen the whole city. We went to a museum, we saw priceless works of art. We ate pancreas.
Their parents don't know where they are, and they are free to explore Chicago at their leisure. Ferris Bueller has a very distinctive sense of freedom that no longer exists. And it's more than enough to get the nostalgic juices flowing.
I'm sorry to hear that. Now come on over here and pick me up.
Number 6. The Goonies. In many ways, The Goonies encapsulates the 1980s.
Do it! Cut it out, Mo.
It was written by Chris Columbus with a story by Steven Spielberg. It was capitalizing on the adventure movie craze of the time, which was kickstarted by Spielberg's own Raiders of the Lost Ark.
One-Eyed Willie. Yeah, he was the most famous pirate in his time. My dad told me all about him once.
Best of all, it contains a number of notable 80s child stars. You've got Corey Feldman at peak popularity, not to mention teenaged versions of Sean Astin and Josh Brolin. The movie has that distinct Spielbergian charm that permeated the 1980s. Large doses of heart, strong family values, and an unforgettable adventure with imaginative elements. It's all there, and it's all wonderful. Number 5. 16 Candles. This was John Hughes' directorial debut, and it instantly established his now iconic style.
That's why they call them crushes. If they were easy, they call them something else.
One of the most notable teen movies of the 80s, 16 Candles is certainly a product of its time. Unfortunately, that includes some regrettable and outdated elements, but let's look at the positives. The movie has a notable soundtrack that contains the likes of Billy Idol, Spandau Ballet, Oingo Boingo, and Wham! You couldn't compile a greater list of 80s artists. And of course, there's the cast, containing Anthony Michael Hall and 80s queen Molly Ringwald. Ringwald would work extensively with Hughes throughout the decade, and they collaborated on another classic romantic teen comedy, 1986's Pretty in Pink. Add Hughes and Ringwald together and you have the perfect recipe for 80s nostalgia.
I'm just gonna go in, walk out, and come home.
You sure?
Number 4. Die Hard. The 80s were filled with loud action movies starring human Thors like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then in came this relatively realistic action film with a smart script, grounded elements, and the funny guy from Moonlighting.
Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs.
Bruce Willis's everyman persona made him an instant movie icon, and ironically, action star. Die Hard is notable for being unlike anything else at the time.
After all your posturing, all your little speeches, you're nothing but a common thief.
I am an exceptional thief, Mrs. McLean, and since I'm moving up to kidnapping, you should be more polite.
And that has only made it more a product of its time. We remember Die Hard as a movie of the 80s because it defied the popular tropes of the decade and changed how action movies were made. It is instantly nostalgic for anyone who was alive at the time.
Happy trails, Hans.
Number 3. E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Steven Spielberg was a defining director of the 1980s, and E.T. is arguably his masterpiece of the era. While Spielberg has directed many different types of movies, his name will be forever linked to a certain imaginative style. A style that defines most of his 80s work. And E.T. is that style personified.
Is he a pig? He sure eats like one.
When shows like Stranger Things are compared to the work of Spielberg, they're mostly being compared to E.T. It has that transportive power to shoot viewers back in time, not only visually, but stylistically and thematically. 80s kids were raised on E.T., as it was quite literally the most popular movie ever made at the time. It defines the early 80s in all the best and most nostalgic ways. And it always makes us want Reese's Pieces.
This is reality for him.
Number 2. Back to the Future. You cannot think of the 1980s and not think about Back to the Future. The movie helped define the decade, and it's still regarded as one of the greatest blockbusters.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
And it is gloriously 80s. Yes, most of it takes place in the 50s, but the movie is undeniably a product of its own decade. There's Michael J. Fox at the height of his cultural dominance.
Would you say anything, George? Say, well, whatever's natural. Well, the first thing that comes into your mind. Nothing's coming to my mind. Jesus, George, it was a wonder I was even born. What? Nothing.
There's his puffy vest, life preserver, a DeLorean, references to Van Halen and loud glam metal, skateboarding aplenty, and yes, Huey Lewis's The Power of Love. Just as 80s viewers were basking in nostalgia for the 50s, so do we bask in nostalgia for the 80s. Look, we still think the 80s were like 20 years ago. Don't tell us the real math. Before we unveil our number 1 pick, here are some honorable mentions. Flashdance. Dancing movies were all the rage in the 80s. The Lost Boys, a late 80s hair metal band as vampires.
Why don't you try some noodles?
Worms.
I mean, they're worms.
Risky Business. Nothing screams 80s quite like Tom Cruise's breakout.
Just take those old records off the shelf.
Stand By Me. Takes place in the late 50s, but full of 80s icons.
Gordy, are you there? Maybe he's dead.
He's not dead. He's still breathing, you idiot.
Well, I don't know. Hey. It's cool, you guys. Just fainted.
Say Anything. Nothing says 80s quite like John Cusack wearing a long coat and holding a boombox.
In your eyes, the light, the heat. I am complete.
Number 1. The Breakfast Club. Somehow, The Breakfast Club is both timeless and the most perfect representation of the 80s imaginable.
Sushi?
Rice, raw fish, and seaweed.
You won't accept a guy's tongue in your mouth and you're gonna eat that?
The entire point of the movie is that human issues are universal and transcend boundaries. Presumably, those boundaries include time. The teens of the 25th century will face the same issues as the teens of the mid-1980s.
When you grow up, your heart dies.
Who cares?
I care.
But man, does this movie take us back in time. The hair, the clothes, the dance sequence to a song whose lyrics are very on the nose. But perhaps the biggest nostalgia factor here is the cast. This is peak Brat Pack era after all. It has Emilio Estevez screaming and shattering a window. It has Judd Nelson triumphantly punching the sky. And yes, it has a theme song you'll have trouble getting out of your head.
Don't you forget about me.
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from WatchMojo. And be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.